Maple Leafs head coach Sheldon Keefe continues to play mad scientist with his lineup, while Connor McDavid is having a season for the ages, but will it be enough come playoff time? Hey everyone, welcome into another SUN Sports Roundtable. Rob Wong, joined alongside by Toronto SUN Sports columnist Steve Simmons and Toronto SUN Maple Leafs beat writer Terry Koshan. And guys, the Maple Leafs coming off two big wins over the Oilers and the Devils, but all everyone seems to want to talk about these days is Sheldon Keefe's lines, sometimes going 11 forwards and 7 defensemen. Alex Kerfoot on the top line with Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner. Terry, we'll start with you. There are 17 games remaining. Is it smart for Sheldon Keefe to be experimenting with his lineup this much this late in the season?
Well, he has luxury to do it, right? And there is still a bit of time here. You know, in a perfect world, Ryan O'Reilly is healthy, and you don't have to be juggling things around up front as much as you are. We're still curious to see how that lines up down the middle once O'Reilly does come back, but you know, Keefe has some time on his side. And I think the thing to take into consideration, too, is that they're still winning hockey games. They still have that 4-point cushion on Tampa for second place in the division, which is important for home ice. So he's able to do some experimenting, and at the same time, the Maple Leafs are still able to put W's on the board, as we saw the other day against Edmonton. So a luxury of time, I suppose, but also at the same time, you want to get to a point where you're nailing this down, and the Leafs aren't there yet, but I would like to think that perhaps with 8 or 10 games left, whether O'Reilly is back in or not, you get things where you want them to be, and that goes for the blue line as well.
Well, it starts with O'Reilly, because if you don't have him healthy, then you don't know what your playoff lineup is, and he's the biggest pickup they've made.
Yep. And
so where is he going to fit? Is he going to be the second line center? Is he going to be the third line center? How is it all going to fit? And then who plays where after that? The question for Sheldon right now is not the forwards. It's what you do with your defense. He's got 9 of them. He has to figure out which 6 are going to, not just which 6, which pairs of 2, 3 pairs of 2, which are going to play in the playoffs against Tampa, and how that's going to line up. And I think he's got about 10 games, I figure, to figure out which of the 9 defensemen will fit best into the holes of the 6 spots he has available. And it's a bit of a game of musical chairs right now. He has too many bodies for not enough spots, and he's not going to be playing 11 and 7 come playoff time. I can be assured of that.
Well, and I think the thing I would keep in mind, too, with the blue line, Steve, is that we're really talking about 7 here. Simmons and Gustafsson aren't playing in the playoffs unless there are injuries. So it's really working that 7. And then, you've got McCabe, Riley, Brody, Giordano is 4. And then you've got Hull, Liljegren, and Schenn for 2 spots. So I think you can pare that list down a bit. But at the same time, you're right. It is getting that right and making sure that it does work by the time, April 17th or 18th rolls around.
Meanwhile, we saw on Saturday night, another multi-point effort by Connor McDavid, ho-hum. But as we've also seen many times this season, Steve, it came in a losing effort. For as great as Connor McDavid is he good enough to drag this Oilers team that still seems to have a lot of flaws to a Stanley Cup final?
To a Stanley Cup final, yes. And the reason I say that is because the West is so watered down compared to the East. There are no great teams in the West. And unless Colorado is at full strength completely and they don't have Kadri from last year, they're not as good as they were a year ago. So Colorado's not as good. The other teams at the top are all flawed. So Edmonton can, because McDavid and Draisaitl are so great. And then you add in Kane and Hyman and now Ekholm. If they get any kind of goaltending, which they don't get very often, but if they do, they have a chance, I think, to get right through the West.
I would agree with Steve on that, and I would say this: if there's a portion of Leaf Nation that's worried about, whether Ilya Samsonov and Matt Murray can be the 2 men in that to lead the Leafs all the way, take into consideration what's going on in Edmonton. We know it's not going to be Jack Campbell, the struggles all year, and if I'm an Oilers fan, I'm not hanging my hat on Stuart Skinner right now. So that's going to be the key, as it is with most teams, goaltending in Edmonton. But and it would be a shame for them to waste, if you will, the season that McDavid's having. It's one for the ages. I know Steve has touched on it in his column and putting McDavid on the Mount Rushmore of hockey players right now, and he's just so far ahead of everybody else. But completely with Steve on this. If the Oilers don't have the goaltending, even in a West that, like Steve says, is not great, not excellent, if they don't have that goaltending, we're not going to see them in the Cup final.
You go back to last year's playoffs, and I think this is where sort of the McDavid season began. I think it began last year in the playoffs when I think he ended up with 33 points in 16 games, which is phenomenal by any standard. I don't care what era we're talking about. This is just unbelievable. A guy can get 2 points a game in today's hockey in the playoffs. If he can play that kind of hockey again, then he's going to give trouble to everybody. He's going to be that motivated, and that excited, and that pumped up to play. And he's been getting that. You watch him. He's like Gretzky used to be in a different kind of way. If Gretzky had 2 points, he wanted 4. Gretzky had 4, he wanted 6. And I think McDavid has a little bit of that in him.
I was going to say, just real quick on that, we saw it the other night. The Leafs knew that, they could keep him in a box to a degree, or hope they could. He wound up with 3 points, but, they were able to keep him contained more or less. I thought Austin Matthews did a good job. And whether there's that type of matchup in the West, we'll have to see. But like I said earlier, just if that season, the season that he's had and will have for the remainder of it, doesn't result in much for the Oilers in the end, it will have been a waste on, of his talent for sure.
Well, we'll see how far McDavid and the Oilers can go. As always, let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. For Steve Simmons and Terry Koshan, I'm Rob Wong. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week on another SUN Sports Roundtable.